some short rapid fire presentations on the landscape succession and climate adaptation work that they've been doing at the moment. They released their policy just a couple of months back from memory, is that correct? All right. And before we start, I would like to just acknowledge the traditional owners of the country of at least where I live and work, which is the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. Australia has had over 60,000 years of very careful stewardship, and that is something that we are very much needing to catch up on, at least down here, and a lot of their work is important for landscape adaptation and climate change work going forward. So without further ado, I will hand it over to you at Edinburgh, Kate Hughes, if you want to take it away. Go for it.
Great, thank you, Tessa. Okay, so I'll share my presentation. How fantastic to see so many people here. It's great that it's such a busy forum. So I'll share my screen first. So yeah, my name's Kate Hughes, and let's see, is that coming up? And yeah, it's a great pleasure to be here at this Climate Change Alliance Horticulture Forum, and we're going to talk about living collections from the Royal Botanic Garden Edinburgh. So I'm going to talk for about 10 minutes on our recently published living collection policy, and then I'm going to hand over to Will Hinchcliffe, who will talk about how we're looking at managing the collections, and then Caitlin Johnston will take over with talking about a project that we've got based at the gardens using nature-based solutions. And we thought it might be, in order to get through all the talks, it would be useful to wait, if you've got discussion points and questions, that if you could save them till the end, and we'll keep some time at the end to have that discussion. Great, so I will crack on. So as Tessa said, I edited and project managed the production of our recently published living collection policy, and I thought I'd just give you a sort of, this gives us some context to how we're managing the living collection. So I thought I'd just run through briefly the structure and process of the document. And the background to it is that it's a revision of our 2006 living collection policy, and that in turn was a revision of the 1994 draft acquisition policy. So we produce these documents from time to time, and the point behind them is to ensure that we are on track with our living collection and ensuring it maintains relevance, and that it's dealing with the issues of the day, as it were, and as we know what those are at the moment are significant biodiversity loss and the impacts of climate change on the collections. And what it really is, main aim is, it's been produced to be consumed by an external audience, but it's really our internal guide for us in the horticulture department to guide us on how we're dealing with the collections, and also the wider RBGE team who interact with the collections, but really to make sure that we're managing and cultivating and using the collections to conserve it while ensuring that we comply. And when I first started to work on this document, I had a look back through at other similar policies that RBGE had produced, and came across this one from the 1970s. And it's a very different document. It's 2 sheets of typed paper and then 8 sheets of lists of families. It's very taxonomic and categorizing families into cultivation groups, and it's about acquisition. What do we want and how are we going to grow it? But what I noticed was that in the top paragraph and the top page is that the principle of the use of material of known wild origin is a high priority, and this is a high priority for us now. So this is a thread that is running through our collection management for decades now. And then, as I mentioned, the most recent past is the 2006 policy, which again is very much about acquisition and categorizing into cultivation groups. But there is a page in there on climate change. The effects are less well known than they are now, but it's interesting that in that text is also mentioned plant health and the impacts of climate change on plant health. And while again this wasn't sort of quite so widely discussed at that point, but this is something that's really in our face, in our discussions every day now. And so we're seeing these changes coming through. So just a snapshot of the contents page of the current document, and I've pulled out some of the sort of key sections. But acquisition is still there, but it's playing a sort of more balanced role in the document as a whole now. But terms such as sustainability, biosecurity, threatened species, biodiverse gardens, these are really important sections for us in how we're managing the collection. And at the end, there's 6 appendices which provide flowcharts and detail on our processes so that we ensure that we're all operating under the same set of processes. So just to sort of run through the basic structure, we start with the what and the why of the collection and the vital statistics of the collection. And these are drawn from the RBGE catalogue of plants. And this is an exercise that we do every 5 years, take a snapshot of the database. And this helps us to understand how the collection's doing and sort of keep us on track and enables us to monitor the collection. And then we move into the aims, and the document's divided into 5 sort of main sections, and it just so happens that these all begin with the C. That's more by chance than design, but they're the really sort of important aims that are driving our collection management. So ensuring that we're compliant with national and international laws and regulations, that we're curating the collections and using the highest horticultural standards to cultivate them. And all of this is really underpinned by conservation, and not just conserving the species and the landscapes. We have heritage landscapes and conserving those, but also using the collections to conserve those species beyond the garden walls as well. So we cultivate plants that are used for restoration and other conservation projects outside of our own gardens. And then communication's the final one. So we use the collection to communicate about the world of plants to a whole range of informal and formal learners, but also not just communicating and sharing the world of plants, but also sharing our data and the data that we hold about plants. That's an important part of communication for us. And then we move into the main text, and it describes and illustrates our process and our approach in more detail. And there's a section on sustainability. So this is a kind of, as it were, a sort of new section for this kind of policy document. And I think Will and Caitlin will talk in more detail about how we're managing the collections in a sustainable way. It just doesn't make sense for us not to, of course. And energy use is a really important part of that. So we're thinking about how can we divert our reliance from fossil fuels away from fossil fuels. And there is two areas where we're doing this. So we've got a high investment, long-term project on glasshouse renovation, which is with glasshouses are heavily reliant on fossil fuels. And I won't go into detail about that because that's a whole nother presentation. But when that's complete, there will be a 27% reduction in our reliance on fossil fuels to manage and maintain our glasshouses. But we were looking at how can we, in a more perhaps sort of day-to-day way, reduce our use of fossil fuels? And so there's been a prioritisation and allocation of budget to shift from petrol and diesel-powered tools, equipment and vehicles over to battery-powered rechargeable tools and equipment. And that is largely complete now, and there's just the large vehicles that are diesel powered remaining, and we've got a commitment to move away from them by 2030. So I mentioned my screen is frozen, there we go, the appendices, and these are, like, I think for me in some ways there's one of the most sort of useful parts of the document, that they provide these flowcharts that all staff can refer to. There's a glossary explaining the different documents that govern our activities, and they just make sure that we're all operating in the same way and using the same processes, and that's governing how we move plants around, making sure we do it in a biosecure way, and also deaccessioning if a plant does need to leave the collection, ensuring that all the different factors that need to be considered are properly considered, and that the final destination of the plant is again appropriate and well considered. So the document's been published now, it's been circulated. There's a PDF on the RBGE website, and you're very welcome, if you want to look in more detail at it, to go to the RBGE website. You can download it. And we're in implementation phase, and so staff time needs to be allocated to all these processes take time. Staff time needs to be allocated for that, and there have been some staff workshops on ensuring that we all understand and are using the processes and regulatory processes that govern plant movement and biosecurity. And now we're in writing the phase of writing garden management plans, and these are specific plans for specific areas of the garden, ensuring that they're being managed in the context of and align with the policy document. So we're going to review the policy every 5 years, and in the meantime produce the catalogue of plants, which is, like I say, a 5-yearly cycle. The other document that we produce at the same time as the policy document is the vision document. So the policy document, as I mentioned, is more of an internal, it's for us, guiding us, and it's a sort of professional level document. But the former director of horticulture wanted to produce a document for a different audience, perhaps for a non-professional audience, explaining why the collection is important, what we do with the collection to that non-professional audience. So, for example, our supporters, funders, politicians. So it just gives it's a much shorter document, which gives a summary with key messages and short case studies. And that's been a really useful handout document for that different audience. So that's my brief introduction to our living collection policy. And I'll hand over to Will and Caitlin, who will have more detail about how we're implementing it. So I'll stop sharing now. I can find the stop sharing button. I'm struggling to see the stop sharing button. What happens if I escape?
It's next to leave. It's where the share button is.
Oh, it's still, yeah, still not got a cross on it.
It's
oh, there it is. I see. Yeah, I see. Thanks.
So I'll just bring up my presentation. Sorry, 1 minute. I'm having IT issues. I did it so perfectly earlier. Worked out how to do it. I've clicked on the wrong button. Yeah.
Technology is magnificent.
Can everybody see my presentation?
Great.
Can you hear me okay?
I see it. Can hear you, yeah.
Okay, so today I'm going to be summarising a recent study that used the Climate Change Alliance of Botanic Gardens climate assessment tool to explore the vulnerability of tree collections in botanic gardens under climate change, with a particular focus on UK collections. So this is something I did for submission as an MSc thesis, and I'm hoping to prepare it for publication as a journal article later this year. And there's a few people on the call here who've contributed data towards this study. So thank you very much to all of the institutions that contributed their collections data for this work. So many of the tree species currently cultivated may not be suitable in the future, and this has big implications, not only for conservation and landscape design, but also for visitor experience. Many people here today will already be very familiar with the climate assessment tool. It's one of the flagship projects initiated by the Alliance, and I've lent on it really heavily for my study. It's a very accessible tool, and you can kind of summarize it as an innovative risk-based system that models how tree species may fare under future climates. It produces results under 3 different climate scenarios, and using the climate assessment tool, I analysed data from 19 UK tree collections to assess species vulnerability over time. The meta-analysis of the climate assessment tool's results revealed a stark pattern under the SSP3 2090 climate scenario. In the south of the UK, collections could see an increase in the proportion of trees considered climate vulnerable, whereas in contrast, collections in the north might see a rise in species thriving under optimal conditions. Interestingly, but as you would expect, the taxonomic composition of a collection strongly affects its climate resilience. This suggests that we can improve outcomes by strategically including species that are already better matched to projected climates. This chart shows the percentage of trees modelled as being within optimal climate range under the SSP3 2090 climate scenario across all sites. And on this chart, what you can see is there's a benchmark species list, and that's represented in blue on the chart. And this is compared against the results for the actual tree collection at each location. So some collections are modelled to outperform these benchmark species lists. So these include collections like Dorwick, Logan, Benmore, and RHS Harlow Carr, whilst many other collections may benefit from species reprioritisation within collections. The need for this is already quite well understood by many collections, and we can see this outlined in adaptive management planning activities. And Kew's landscape succession strategy would be good evidence that strategic planning for species reprioritisation is already underway in many collections, and this is going to shape the tree collections in the UK in the future. One useful concept utilised in the study was climate risk rating shift. This metric was used to highlight the trends. So a pairwise analysis of the results showed a strong correlation between the percentage of worsening modelled outcomes for individual trees and southerliness. On the left, I've got a pairwise analysis of the results with the data framed north to south. And on the right, what was then plotted is the percentage of trees in the collection with climate rating shift worsening, and that's framed against latitude to allow simple statistical tests to be applied and to evidence the significance of the trends. The study explored specific species responses in 3 key locations. So I really dug into Logan, Royal Botanic Garden Edinburgh, and Royal Botanic Gardens Kew. And these examples help to ground the broader findings in practical real-world contexts. So this is an alluvial flow diagram for Logan Botanic Garden with the current climate, which sits currently with a modelled mean annual temperature of 8.7 degrees on the left, and under SSP3 2090, the future climate scenario, we see the modelled mean annual temperature rising to 11.3. And then you've got the climate rating scores from 0 to 11 running up in the vertical bars. And the flow diagram shows how the shift of those ratings between the current conditions and the modelled future conditions. And I've highlighted representative species in those bands to really try and communicate what's going on with species that people who probably manage or know the gardens are familiar with. So Logan Botanic Gardens is interesting because it's the collection with the lowest percentage of trees. So it's got 37% of trees modelled as under optimal conditions in the current climate. And then it has the second highest percentage of trees modelled as under optimal conditions in 2090. So it moves from having 37% modelled as being under optimal conditions to 92%. So the highest number of trees with improved outcomes. So following this data, what we should expect to see a high proportion of trees in Logan that are currently climate stressed, but likely to improve in the future. This probably doesn't really reflect what we're actually seeing in the current conditions. And there is undoubtedly a horticultural factor at play here, with effective use of microclimates extending what can be grown under current conditions. Another potential reason for the low percentage of trees modelled as under optimal conditions could be that the resolution of the climate data may not be fine enough to accurately characterize the Logan microclimate. So if the mean annual temperature is underestimated, this will, due to the origin of the species in the collections, decrease the number of trees under optimal conditions, leading to them to be, being considered at risk in error. So there could be a slight, the granularity of the climate data that's being used might, I think, be underestimating the mean annual temperature at Logan. So if we pick a species here, I don't know whether you can see my pointer, we've got Cordyline australis. So this is really widely planted at Logan Botanic Garden and is a signature plant of the garden. And there are specimens at Logan that are more than 100 years old. So under current conditions, the climate assessment tool returns Cordyline australis with a climate rating of 6. And this is sort of saying that it's on the shoulder of Botanic Garden range. But for us, or managing Logan, as the species is well tested with over 100 years in cultivation at the garden, we don't really need to consider it as being at risk, even though it's modelled as being at risk. What is encouraging is that the CAP modelling predicts that the garden's climate will warm to a temperature that's closer to the middle of the natural range of Cordyline australis, which supports the continuing representation of this species as a signature plant in the garden. And you can see, you see this on the chart with it jumping from 6 up to a climate rating of 11, which confers to being in the middle of the natural range for the species. And then we've got species like, in this band, Aeschylus wangii and Podocarpus henklei. Now they're relatively new introductions to the collection and to wider UK cultivation, so we probably know less about them. At Logan, they're growing in the cooler shoulder of the Botanic Garden range, and they're less well tested than Cordyline australis, which means for us that we should probably be monitoring their performance more closely. The climate assessment tool predicts that by 2090, these will be in the middle of their Botanic Garden range and closer to the middle of their natural range. So Aeschylus wangii and Podocarpus henklei are both threatened in the wild. Aeschylus wangii is classified as vulnerable and Podocarpus henklei as endangered. But distribution data is minimal for both species, and conservation actions are not very well documented, and we could assume that they are lacking. So where threatened species can be well matched to future climates and made accessible to researchers, opportunities for research and conservation action can be improved. So Aeschylus wangii and Podocarpus henklei are both exceptional species that do not seed bank well. So in this case, the CAT analysis supports the continued representation of these species at Logan. And it could be that these are species that we may wish to expand on as larger ex situ conservation programs. So the historic and contemporary, so in sort of summary of the Logan results, the historic focus on the acquisition and cultivation of sort of half-hardy or less than hardy trees in the collection at Logan Botanic Garden has really resulted in a collection that's very forward-looking and therefore potentially quite resilient to future climates. And I think what we need to do in our next step of understanding that is to better characterize the climate at Logan. And that's going to really help interpretation of these results and also help inform adaptive management planning and species prioritization within the collection. We haven't got time today for a really expansive discussion of the results, but I found this method of pulling apart the data to be really interesting, and it was really useful to look at the modelled response of individual species. So this is the Edinburgh results that we've got up on screen now. It's quite difficult to make generalizations about the performance of trees within the Edinburgh Gardens, but what the results do highlight is that we can expect a high level of change Therefore, close monitoring of tree performance will be increasingly important to predict the wider landscape impact of climate change on the tree collection. The results show the climate to warm to both the advantage and disadvantage of trees in the collection, and this includes some of the rarest and most threatened trees in the collection at RBGE. So in going through the data and the results, and in the study, I've acknowledged that there are some limitations to the tool, particularly in relation to the resolution of climate data and the interpretation of the modelled response of species with narrow natural ranges. And because of this, and this is quite clearly stated in the accompanying guidance that comes with the tool. I'm not sort of saying anything that the authors of the tool didn't really say here. Expert interpretation of the results is really crucial. So factors like historic range, known threats, ecophysiology, and plant performance in cultivation are all really important when collections managers are assessing outputs from the climate assessment tool. But it's an incredibly useful tool, and it's been really useful to use it across collections to pick out trends of risks. And ultimately, I think proactive planning and adaptive management based on robust performance data and species-specific knowledge is going to be essential for us to adapt our collections and manage our collections in a changing climate. So I'm going to leave it there, and I'm happy to answer any questions on that at the end. And I'm going to pass over to Caitlin, who's going to talk about nature-based solutions and the Plants with Purpose programme at RBGE.
See how this goes, bringing up the slides here. Can everyone hear? Yes. Excellent. Okay, so I'm Caitlin Johnstone. I'm a scientist here at the Botanics in nature and community-based solutions, and I lead the Plants with Purpose research program, where we're trying to gather evidence from all our expertise in plants and be able to apply that to what's happening as we react to the changing climate conditions in a natural environment, in a botanical world, and then out in a city urban environment as well. So it helps that we're located right in the heart of the city. And in cities particularly, we're dealing with heat island effects where everything, it soaks up heat, the pavement, the buildings, they gather in heat and then they radiate it back out at night. And so cities can be several degrees hotter than natural areas surrounding them. We also have stormwater flooding. That's the big issue in cities where areas are paved over, water can't sink in. So flooding and heat are really big for cities. We know that plants make a difference in those, so we try and gather the evidence for it and then reach back out to the community. Sorry about the lawnmower there. So this is our team. Emma Bush and I lead the team. We have a PhD student now who's focused on the functional traits of plants and their effect on hydrology. We have a new student that should be starting this fall, and we're looking at doing that program on the functional traits of plants for water quality and pollution mitigation. Because nature, what's happening with the climate and what's happening with biodiversity are very interconnected. We've also brought on a pollinator ecologist this year, and we work with Heriot-Watt University as well as internal teams. It's just a global snapshot. At the top, you have global temperature changes since 1970, and at the bottom, you have global biodiversity loss, the same. So they are very clearly affecting one another. Nature and community-based solutions are supposed to bring all of these different areas together for societal change. So this is the definition from the International Union for Conservation of Nature. We here like to think of it more as nature-based thinking, because the solutions are what you end up with. Here's what we're going to put into play. But to make sure that those are done well, you have to have ecological framework to the thinking and the planning and the projects in general to end up with a nature-based solution that's going to be effective. And we have to make sure that that gets out beyond the garden grounds. So these are a lot of the groups that we work with, either as collaborators and supporters in developing new projects or for knowledge exchange in general. And internally, making sure that nature-based solutions becomes part of the framework of how the garden operates in general. So we have a nature-based solutions working group that meets quarterly, sometimes 3 times a year, depending on the year, and brings together the heads of all of these different departments so that we can fail faster, better. We manage adaptively. We have what's happening with climate is unpredictable. At first, 6 years ago, when we put in our first rain garden, the idea was that flooding was the really big thing everyone was going to face. Everything was flooding. And now, several years on, at least in Scotland, we're seeing that it's flooding and drought, spells of drought in between massive storms. So we need to be able to function with both. And if we aren't managing adaptively, where our systems are put in place to track what works, what doesn't, we have communication across the different departments to make sure that can happen so that we can react with the best knowledge, make a change, and see how that goes for the future. Oh, they've stopped changing slides. We'll do it manually. So those are our 3 areas, our innovation, research, and knowledge exchange. Okay. Our weather is starting to get a bit erratic. Up in the left-hand corner, you see a storm that we had this past summer, which was not a ridiculous amount of water. It was 11 millimeters of water. So fairly heavy rain, but doing just fine, except that the entire storm fell within the span of 8 minutes. That you go make a cup of tea and you missed that it rained at all. But we had flooding across the gardens because of the intensity of the storm. Water is picking up everything that's around it. So it's picking up soil, it's picking up pollution from roadways, it picks up everything because that intensity has increased. Anything that we have that's a slow acting system is not going to be able to handle all of that water. And if you had drought right before it, then plants that are in it are going to be stressed out. So the root systems could shrink. They could close their stoma to conserve water. So when a rain does hit, they just aren't prepared to action that water. So we need to start managing that adaptively. You see that in the last month, that's the chart at the bottom, we had less than 1 millimeter of rain in an entire month. One day was 0.2, one day was 0.6, and everything else was sunny and dry. In Scotland in spring, that should be unheard of. Same time previous year, we got 154 millimeters of rain in the month of May, and about 150 of it fell in 4.5 days consecutively. So when we're getting water is erratic, we have to be able to manage it in a way that's going to benefit both the human and the natural environment together. So a lot of that is done with gathering the evidence. This is our rain garden at the Botanics. We put it in because Path was flooding, and being botanists, we thought we'd solve it with plants. So dug out a shallow depression, put that extra soil next to it to create a berm so that you just mechanically, you're giving the water somewhere to settle. Modified that soil so that plants could actually use it, soak it up. You had better infiltration, but enough moisture that plants could survive during drought spells. And then put in a bunch of plants that would do well in that environment. And what those plants are has shifted over the years. It's being tracked, and that's a big part of our Plants with Purpose research program, is finding what are the right species to do what we want them to do, and having plants as functional partners in infrastructure. So we have sensors going through all of it. There's soil moisture sensors, there's leaf wetness sensors. We had an MSc student from Heriot-Watt University looked at soil moisture and penetration. And the important thing they found there was that the water content is influenced by the planting regimes and the soil composition. And the way that we have the plants arranged so that you have root systems and soil on top with trees behind that can start to filter some of the water that's coming down that hill, you have less clogging of the substrate, which means it can continue to function over time. So really looking at the functions of those plants and how do we apply them in a way that's going to make sense. We're also looking at root systems of plants. This is one of my favorite graphs from actually a very old paper on prairie systems in the States. You can see all the way over on the left-hand side, that is the root system of lawn grass. So if we have a green space and we think that it's going to be great infiltration and help us deal with flooding, but it's just lawn grass as a monoculture, heavily fertilized, you may not actually be helping deal with the flooding issue there. But if you have a mix of plants and can have a biodiverse space, what are these different root systems doing? We currently have a master's student that's looking at studying biodiverse lawns. So not letting it grow up into a full prairie, not having it as an inaccessible meadow, but as a walkable lawn. And if the plants are kept low, what do we see in their root systems? And she's studying that right now to see if we can find that nice middle ground. Our PhD student is looking at pocket rain gardens, which are stormwater planters, which Kate showed in her presentation. You have a box on the side of a building that intersects the downpipe, so the drainage pipe that comes down the building. Instead of just flooding right out onto the ground with that intensified water that came off of the roof and funneled down together, it goes into a planter, and the plants in the top of it are watered by that roof water. They are helping to slow down the water, and their root system is filtering that water at the same time. And then it goes into a small tank to collect any excess water at the bottom and eventually flow out again. So in a storm system, you're slowing down that flow of water, using that water as it comes, and you have more plants in your area. And it's also, this is her design, so we can send the slides around later if you'd like, but it shows how it moves through that system and the study that she's doing. And then it's also getting it out into the wider environment. So she's working with Scottish Water and getting stormwater planters out into the community. And can people care for them in a way that's going to still be beneficial and they'll still be working years later? And can that have an impact on stormwater flows in the city? We've also looked to the future, working with our horticulture team and Heriot-Watt University. We did hydrology mapping of the entirety of the garden. So we took that 11 millimeter, 10-minute storm that we had and simulated what was actually happening so that you can see areas where water has started to pool all across the grounds. And then we know these are areas that we need to target for new projects for the future. And then some examples of the knowledge exchange. So that's the stormwater project, getting that out into the environment. We have large projects within the city. Our George Street, one of the main streets in the city, is being redone, and they want to put rain gardens down it. And they've come to us to say, what are the right plants to put in there? What environment do they need to be okay? So one of the first things was to look at that civil engineering plan, which basically had civil engineering, stormwater management under the street, and then plants as decoration on the top of the rain gardens. So, 15 centimeters of soil. And that was the first change, to say, nope, we're going to need 500 millimeters minimum soil depth so that they're actually functioning in that rain garden. And then we worked, I want to do a shout out that botanic gardens are more than just the plants or the science side. A lot of us have libraries and education departments and herbariums. And by working with our botanical historians, we were able to do the research on that Georgian time period when that street was first built, because that is a heritage site for the city of Edinburgh, and find that the Georgian botanical style was actually very unique, a really important piece of that cultural heritage. But they also used far more perennials and taller plantings than was initially put into the plan. It was a very Victorian style, small and tidy. by using the cultural and social research that also comes in the botanical world, we have plants that are going to do much better for stormwater management and their function because we looked at that cultural and social side. So it really takes everybody. And I'm going to end with a favorite quote from our estates manager, our sustainability manager. When we had that storm, we had inundation in every single one of our buildings. She acknowledged that the risk of not adapting to extreme weather events far outweighs the cost of implementing whatever adaptation measures. So it's really wonderful to have a horticultural and science department that work together closely for where we go for the future. Thanks.
Oh, okay. Wow. Thank you, all three of you. Each of those was just brilliant. If anybody has any questions, you want to put your hand up or pop them in chat. Yeah, I'm gonna put an applause in there as well. Yay. Patricia, go for it.
Thank you. So nice to see you all and some faces I've seen before. So I'm Patricia Malcolm. I'm from BGCI, Botanic Gardens Conservation International, where the tool is currently being hosted. So it's really nice to see how people are using it in examples. I've got two very separate things, so I don't know whether you want me. So there's a mention. I need to tell you, Tessa, so this is quite timing. So I got an email last week from Coastal Maine Botanic Gardens, and they're putting together a climate change conference on botanic gardens, and they want examples of how the tool is being used. So they want, so it would be really good to maybe get a bunch of, I mean, Tom just left the call. I know they used it at Q, and so it'd be good to get a bunch of people that might have used it and real examples of how it's being used in the botanic gardens. But I'll send you a link with that
Yeah,
contact.
could you forward that to me, and I'll include it in the email when we put out the notification that this video has gone online.
Because I think your presentation, William, will be probably the type of thing that will, what worked, what didn't, what can be improved, will be the type of thing that they're looking for. So I will follow up with an email on that. And the other thing on your collections policy, I absolutely loved those flow charts. I mean, I do. I manage the accreditation process at BGCI, so I read through a lot of collection policies, and they are one of the best I've seen. So if I could use them in some of our training courses to show people how the others are doing it, I would love to get that permission. Kate, of course, linking to your collection policy and so on. I think it. And a question, how, because we're going through a training of 20 gardens in the Caribbean region, of taking them through building their collection policy. Do you have how did you start it? Who did you bring into the room? Which stakeholders? Was it the whole team? Was it, do you have some maybe steps that others can take?
Well, yeah, well, thank you for the feedback. That's great feedback and appreciated. And yes, you may use them. I mean, I think, yeah, if you can always reference RBGE that, but yeah, great if there can be useful inspiration for others and function well. And in terms of, so yeah, with time, I did actually have a couple of slides on our process, and I thought it's going to take me too long to talk about that. So very briefly, yeah, we started with internal and horticulture management, and then did a kind of staged consultancy out, sort of layering out the way. So starting with horticulture management, then to the supervisors across all 4 gardens, and then to horticulture staff, and then to science department and the herbarium managers, and the interactions with the other collections, the non-living collections, as it were. So there was, yeah, it was a staged process. But yeah, I just like to think of, right, what do we want? What do we want from the collection? What's important to us, and what is going to be useful to us? And I you know, I'm repeating myself. I keep saying it's for us to make sure that we manage the collection how we want to do it. Collections, you know, vary enormously globally, and they're not all doing the same job necessarily. So that was what our internal discussions were kind of coming back to all the time. Does that make sense? Does that answer your question? I'm happy to sort of go into more detail at another time.
That would be really useful. I'll be in contact. I think the linking back to your mission and your vision as a garden is, you know, is fully, yeah. So thank you.
Okay, thanks.
Anybody else? Put your hands up. I can see someone typing. I wanted to say first that even though I use the cat a lot and I, you know, rough around in that data a lot, that particular way of visualizing the data that you had with just the flow and the split between the two scenarios there, Will, was really interesting to see. Just the way some things move and some things don't, as it were.
Yeah, I think that pairwise analysis, the comparison, is much more useful than the individual results on their own. It's more about the change between the two results than
it's giving you a sort of a broader idea of the landscape as a whole, as opposed to drilling down into like a single species or something like that. I thought that was
So that method of doing
the
pairwise analysis is the method that was applied in that PISA paper. So that's where that's kind of come from, and that graphical representation in alluvial flow diagrams is it works really well.
Read. Tony, you've got your hand up. Go for it.
Thanks, Tessa. Apologies for how I sound and look. It's very early here on the East Coast of the US.
Thank you for coming at this hour.
But yeah, thanks everybody. It was really very useful to see all the work that you're doing and gratifying. I'm from Longwood Gardens outside of Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we're at an earlier stage in terms of using the CAT tool to analyze our collections, and it's very reassuring to see other folks are using this and how it's being implemented. We've been doing something kind of stealing from Q, looking at plotting changes in our collection as color-coded dots on the map, and then looking at that over time. So it's another way of visualizing graphically across the landscape, and it's been very impactful in terms of people beginning to understand where the threats are and sort of where the big landscape threats are. So it's been very helpful, and I'm looking forward to version 2 of the CAT tool to refine that even more. So I don't really have a question, just wanted to comment on that. But Patricia, if you could put folks in touch with the people at Coastal Maine, I think it'd be nice it's good to hear that someone's trying to collate all the institutions who are working on this, and it's an idea that I've been thinking about. So I'd really be interested to hear who's leading that at Coastal Maine.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I mean, they just wanted some examples of people using it. I am happy to be the one. We get lots of people asking us about CAT, so I'm happy to collect everybody who knows. But I'll definitely put you all in contact with them. There was another. I also showcased. There was another one in the US, a different climate group in the US that they were also interested. So I'll let you know who they all are. Sorry, there's so many people from all over the world. I don't have it on top of my head now, but definitely we'll keep those dots being joined.
Great, thank you.
Dive in, Will.
So this is for Patricia and Anthony, really. So as part of my thesis, I did do a little literature review on use of the CAT and other projects that have been using it. So I've tried to capture as many as I could find, and I've got a table that kind of summarizes that. So I can share the thesis with you, and you can pull it out of that if you want.
Please, that would be useful.
I'll just note quickly that there was a question in chat asking if the CAT version 2 will be including soil moisture data. And Peter Symes, who's working with Dr. Dave Kendall, who's still running with this, they are bouncing that around, just trying to figure out how possibly to make that work and what data is available to them. So it's definitely not off the table. It's just a matter of can we make it work in a useful fashion. Go, Will.
I think one of the things I've been considering around this, and there's really for a model like this that deals with global tree data and 50,000 plus tree species, there's probably like a really optimal level of complexity. And as you start to make it more and more complex, that mass applicability might become eroded.
Yeah.
I've also been thinking around this in terms of like, there's so much that we grow across our 4 gardens that currently models as being not well suited to the current climate, but is actually performing very well. That there's a risk that as you add in, more and more climatic factors, the model becomes more reductive, and it is somehow restricts the palette that overly restricts the palette that you're working with. And I think like its application, as I've used it to pick out trends, is probably quite good. But as a species selection tool, it becomes more difficult to use, and it becomes potentially harder. So that I can see in the comment, yeah, we're trying to get a balance between precision and manageability, and that's exactly that's the really important thing. It'd be lovely in the model, in the next iteration of the model, if you could toggle these things on and off and have more controllability. So maybe if climatic moisture index or rainfall is important to you, you can toggle it on, but you can also have it off for a different approach.
The simplicity of the tool. Yeah. Oh, hang on, you go, Claire.
No, I completely agree, and that I would just add that it is designed as a guide and to inform, and then to obviously provide that lateral thinking as to how you use that information. But it is important that we keep it free. It's important that we keep it accessible, and important that we keep it very user friendly as well. I mean, to have a very simple interface was the goal. So you're absolutely right. It's how we kind of keep it functional and still performing and allowing people to, I guess, extrapolate and use that information, as you mentioned, in all the various landscapes that we manage.
Because we do get queries. Of course, everybody here in this room right now, we're all pretty well versed on how plants behave and the complexities of growing them and how complex climate interacts with a growing plant. There are people out there who just want to look at a tree for their backyard as well. And this is still a tool that can be used for them. So as Peter said, we really want to keep that simplicity and usability, but we still want to be able to offer additional climatic parameters for those who want to look into them and that sort of thing. So it's, as Peter said, watch the space. We're working on it. Patricia?
Sorry, just one thing to add to that from non-native English speaker. This tool would also, the simplicity, keeping it simple is super important for those that English is not their first language as well, because the more complex you make a model, the more you need masters or PhDs to actually use it and apply it to the, if it's so complex that you do need, that level, and then it becomes less useful for let's say all gardens around the world. So yes, and the other thing is about making sure that people still upload data in Plant Search and the underlying databases that some, on GBIF and all of these underlying databases that the tools use are super important. Thank you.
Yep. Definitely a reminder for everyone. Make sure all your data is up to date and uploaded. Thank you.
Thank you.
Peter? You want to dive in, Peter? You're still on mute.
On mute. I can never use Teams. I just want to reinforce Patricia's comment. It really is helpful to have more plant records from botanic gardens and urban environments to get that fundamental niche better understood, and we still lack a lot of information. So if you're talking to your neighbouring botanic garden and they haven't uploaded their data, give them a really hard time, because if we can get everyone's data, it would make the tool more robust. So it's one of the observations that we've had. So I really want to reinforce that as a mission for everybody who's listening today, to go out and annoy their resident botanic garden who hasn't uploaded their data to Plant Search.
Thanks. Talking about the cat is always very exciting, but does anybody have any questions specifically for Edinburgh, their living collections policy, and of course the nature-based solutions? Just wanted as a comment, I really enjoyed the fact that with the George Street and looking into Georgian garden design was a way to enable a more effective planting palette. I know just from work in various other places that a lot of people can view heritage as being an obstruction to change, when often it is an enabler of change more than that. So I think that that was a brilliant example of, a little bit of research is just like, well, this is opening doors and making things happen. So really great there, really great outcome. If no one has any other questions, of course, you can always reach out to the staff. Will and Kate and Caitlin, I am sure, will be very happy to hear from you. If any questions you might have, you can send them on to me and I can pass them on. Otherwise, I might wrap things up here. Thank you so much, everyone, for your time, for attending. I'd like to thank our presenters. They were fantastic short fire presentations. Really looking forward to, how the policy develops for you and, shows your way forward and that sort of thing. And also, the work you did with the hydrology at Edinburgh looked really interesting as well. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that. Otherwise, everybody, please carry on with your days or your evenings or your nights. Have a good one. Thank you all for coming. Bye.